And as you recall information, each time that you recall it, it's not the same pathway exactly. It can get a little bit different. So we don't recall events exactly as they happened, and we don't recall them exactly as they were initially encoded. Each time that you recall it, it can change a little bit.
Yeah. So is it true then, what you're saying, is it true that what we remember is a memory of the memory?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly
wow.
what I'm saying. But that's for everyone. That's
Yeah.
not brain injury specific. That is everyone.
This is Recovery After Stroke with Bill Gassiamis, helping you go from where you are to where you'd rather be.
Bill from recoveryafterstroke.com. This is episode 77, and my guests today are Kimberley Meates and Vanessa Bowie. Kimberley is a clinical neuropsychology registrar with clinical experience working across a diverse range of settings, including acquired brain injury, inpatient and community rehabilitation, mental health, and pediatrics. Vanessa completed an undergraduate degree and a graduate diploma in psychology and has just begun a master's degree in occupational therapy. Both ladies are currently gaining experience working at Germain Health under the loving guidance of Dr. Judy Tang. Are you a stroke survivor that wants to know how to heal your brain, overcome fatigue, and reduce anxiety? By the time this episode goes to air, I will have been 8 years into my stroke recovery journey. 3 brain hemorrhages and then brain surgery created similar challenges for me. The thing is, very few people understood what I was dealing with. The only people that did understand were other stroke survivors. One of the unexpected nice things to come out of my stroke experience is that I have been asked to share my story a number of times in newspapers, the national news, and as a speaker at various corporate events in the hope of raising awareness and to support other people that are going through stroke now. Most recently, I was involved in the launch of a joint advertising campaign by the Cancer Council of Australia, Quit Victoria, and the Stroke Foundation, which was called Smokes Lead to Strokes. The aim was to encourage more people to quit smoking and decrease their risk of stroke. Being involved in these campaigns made me realize that stroke prevention is important. However, what I needed when I experienced stroke was help to bridge the gap in the critical time after I went home. Realizing that the amount of support drastically declined once stroke patients leave hospital motivated me to create a way to support stroke survivors so that no one has to do it as hard as my family and I did. If you have fallen in the cracks between hospital and home care and desire to gain momentum in your recovery but do not know where to start, this is where I can help. I will coach you and help you gain clarity on where you are currently in your recovery journey. I will help you create a picture of where you would like to be in your recovery 12 months from now. And I will coach you to overcome what's stopping you from getting to your goal. During coaching, I will also teach you the 10 steps to brain health for stroke survivors and guide you through each step with supporting interviews from experts and information that is based on the latest scientific research. Some of those steps include training on the type of mindset required for an ongoing successful recovery and how to decrease anxiety created by the thoughts of another stroke. There will be a module on emotional intelligence, which will help you manage out of control emotions, information about the gut and how a healthy gut is the first step to a healthy brain. And we will cover nutrition and the kinds of food required for reducing fatigue. And there will also be a module on how to improve sleep and much, much more. If you are one of the first 10 people to join Recovery After Stroke Coaching, you will get a one-on-one private coaching thread with me, access to the course 10 Steps to Brain Health for Stroke Survivors when released, access to members only monthly group training calls, and access to Stroke Survivors private forum. The first 10 people to join also get more than 70% off the full price of $5.99, and 12 months access will only cost you $149. Be one of the first 10 people who apply for Recovery After Stroke Coaching now and get the first 7 days free. After the 7-day free trial, you will only pay the annual amount of $149, and the price of renewal will never increase for as many years that you stay a member. Once the first 10 coaching packages are sold, the price will never be offered again. So take advantage of the 7-day free trial now by clicking the link below if you are watching on YouTube, or by going to recoveryafterstroke.com/coaching if you are listening online. Now it's on with the show. Kimberley and Vanessa, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited actually because, before you become a stroke survivor, you don't know anything about the brain. And then when you become a stroke survivor, what you need to do is find out everything you can about the brain. And most stroke survivors don't know anyone who knows stuff about the brain because we don't generally hang around with psychologists or neuropsychologists or occupational therapists. You guys are few and far between. You guys are like gems. So when I come across people who study the brain or help people recover from injuries of the brain, I get really excited and I kind of latch on. And Dr. Judy Tang, who you guys are working with at the moment, was somebody that I've spoken to at the beginning of my stroke journey. And she was really helpful in giving me some useful information about how I can go about supporting my help. And that was informally, just when we got together at different events. I'm wondering if you guys could share with me what some of the different kinds of memory are, so that we can create a conversation of people listening about who may be struggling with memory at the moment, about how they can utilize the different memories to support them when they're in recovery.
Yeah, definitely. So memory is, it's a very well-known concept within the general population, but the understanding, I guess, about what memory is a little bit lacking. So I'm really glad that you asked that question, so we can kind of go through the different memory components and how you can use them. So we think of memory being split into sort of two major categories. And so it's kind of like the unconscious memories and the conscious memories. So unconscious memories are those things like riding a bike. You once you've learnt that process, you sort of never forget that. That's always stored in your memory. But you don't have to think about when you ride a bike. You're not thinking about, oh, I have to move my leg this way, I have to do this, I have to do that. It's just automatic. So that's the sort of unconscious memory. So it's very procedural. So it's like a step-by-step learning of generally motor skills. So that's a great great thing to focus on in brain injury, because that's one of the areas that's relatively spared in most injuries to the brain. So in rehab, we can exploit that. We can focus on teaching procedural steps, and then the brain will take that on automatically and just do them automatically. So that's a really good area to focus on in rehab.
How is it that that unconscious memory thing is mostly not impacted by most strokes? How is that something that we get away with?
It's generally because of where it's sort of stored in the brain. So it's stored throughout the brain, and the cerebellum, sort of at the back part of the brain, is very involved in motor movements and the storage of that sort of knowledge. I mean, it can be impacted, but it's just generally that those areas are spared, I guess. I mean, it's not true in every case.
Yeah.
But that's sort of my understanding. I don't know if you've got any further insight on that.
I think because it mostly temporal lobe, depending on the type of stroke though as well. So if these sorts of memories are being stored in the cerebellum, it might not be affected as largely as the temporal lobe.
So it's kind of a similar, that's my understanding of it, is it's just more in the cerebellum, and when you have impacts to that. But actually, it's a really good question.
All right, so that's really cool. So these memories that are unconscious or kind of learnt through rote experiences, like riding a bike, etc., they kind of hang around for most of the time, and you guys can make use of those memories and help people in their recovery when they're getting back on their feet, for example. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about, sometimes you do have to relearn those steps. So it can be a relearning process, but the process of taking the steps and then getting it into automatic memory. Automatic memory. That still is a process that can work following brain injury. So that's what a lot of the rehab will focus on, is teaching people step by step to go through each of their daily activities so that it does become automatic. They don't need to think about it anymore. It's just an automatic process for them.
Yeah. Okay. I find it really interesting, the automatic process. You know, when I was in rehab and trying to get my walking back, my left leg was numb. I couldn't feel it. So the sensory neurons weren't telling my brain that the leg was on the ground, or when it was, telling my brain that it was kind of giving mixed signals. So my knee wasn't working properly. It would sort of buckle underneath me and I would trip over, or I would feel unstable. I remember going through a process where I was meditating on the process of walking. So I hadn't walked yet, and I was using meditation to visualize myself walking. What kind of memories, and I'm getting a smile there, massive smile, what kind of memories are those, imagining yourself walking, what kind of memories are they sort of stimulating?
Well, so it's going back through your previous experience. So previously you were able to walk. You can imagine yourself walking. You see people walking out in the street. You have that motor memory in your brain already. It's just like you were saying, the connections sort of blacking. The connections have got a bit mixed up.
Uh-huh.
So it's, when you're imagining it, it's almost like you're doing it.
Yeah.
Those networks are activated, except that your body's not moving. So there's a signal that says, body, don't move, but I'm going to picture it in my head and going to go through each of the steps. So the circuit's being activated for walking. So you're essentially practicing that circuit and reforming those connections in your mind when you're picturing it, which is kind of fantastic in a way. It's
It is fantastic because it doesn't take a lot of effort and it's not as exhausting.
yes.
But so what you're saying is that there's two things going on there with that learning how to walk again. There is a memory, and is that memory in that circuit? Is the circuit the memory?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so our memories are just a bunch of neurons. Basically, that's what our brain is, just made up of neurons, and they form connections between each other. So when they connect and they all fire together or very closely followed by each other, that's sort of what makes the circuit. So within that circuit, that's where all the information is.
So yesterday I went to an expo, and there are the neuro people there. So they've got occupational therapists and such, and they're using VR to try and help retrain people for movement. And I found that fascinating. So even from the sense of when you were making your breakfast, they now can do that with virtual reality, and the person can use that to go and get all of the ingredients out of the fridge and then put it all together. So you don't have to be able to physically get up and go and do it, but you're using this to retrain your brain to go through those processes.
In episode 68, I spoke to George Tafel and Andy Kstol, who were from a company called Rewelio, and they were working on a visual reality software package that when you bought the goggles, you were able to plug into their software and play certain games and imagine certain things working. So this particular event that you went to, what was it called?
That was the Seniors and Disability Expo. So that was at the Melbourne Convention Centre.
Right.
And so there were all sorts of people there who were providing like aids to help people be able to complete tasks in their home or get around in the community. And there were also people there that were to help with sort of their funding plans or where they could go. So I know I was there with occupational therapists as well. So just providing information to people about what's available to them and who they can access. And so this virtual reality thing that I tried was from a group who they have occupational therapists, and they were just telling me about how they were using the virtual reality for people who are going through rehab, just to remake those connections when they weren't actually able to get up at the time. So they're currently still working on that with different type of programs. I got to try a particular game which was just arm movement. So you had to chop these blocks and everything, and it was just getting your arms to move around, and also for reaction time and everything like that, because of course you have to get it within that time period. And it was great. It was really interesting.
Yeah, I know that you've just started your master's in occupational therapy. Have you spent a fair amount of time in the hospitals helping people get back on their feet and retrain their arms, etc.?
Not at this stage. I've only been studying this now for about 5 months. And so I've just finished my first placement, which was actually a community health setting. So hopefully in my future placements, I will be in a hospital setting working on rehabilitation.
Yeah, so what's interesting is the new breed of occupational therapists are really embracing this kind of stuff. And I saw a glimpse of it when I was in Parkville Rehabilitation Hospital that's associated to the Royal Melbourne Hospital.
Yeah.
One of the things they got me to do to help retrain my left arm was to play virtual tennis on the Nintendo Wii.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at normal tennis. I was no better at this tennis, but it was a fun way for me to just be in a safe space, holding a little control, which was easy to hold, that had a rope in case I let go and flung it at somebody's head. And I did use the virtual reality game there to help me retrain my left arm to swing and to twist and to hit this ball so that it could go onto the other side of the
virtual court.
The virtual court. And what was interesting is that I've never played tennis with my left arm before. And I don't think I would have been able to manage to do that with a real tennis racket, but this was a real gentle way to help me bring back these memories that I needed to I'm not sure what the word is, reinvigorate or bring back to life, so that my arm could do things like picking up my toothbrush or picking up a pen or a fork or a knife, because I was spending a lot of time trying to retrain myself. And I noticed that when I would go to scratch my eye, I would go a little bit too, not my eye, but when I'd go scratch my skin around my eye, I'd go a little bit too far and actually poke myself in the eye. And I did that so many times.
So it was really sort of also trying to retrain your spatial awareness as well, I guess.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because I did struggle with that. And I also still struggle with that when I get tired. The doorway on the left-hand side seems to just appear out of nowhere, and I often bump into it. So this world of virtual reality is really starting to take shape. What other memories can it help support if we're bringing it back, if we're using virtual reality to support learning how to walk again or to visualize how to walk again? There's no limit really to what it can do or what it can help with.
Yeah, there's actually quite a lot of things that it's being utilized for. Like, I know at the moment they're using it for people in nursing homes who aren't able to revisit places that they've been to before. So it's also useful for memories and retraining, but also for overall well-being and happiness. So it's actually allowing the people who are using it to go and revisit different places around the world. And quite often it's using something like Google Maps so that they can see this area and revisit that. Or even with sports, they can use the virtual reality if they aren't able to do it anymore. Like you said, doing the lighter sort of activity, because you wouldn't be able to do like real tennis, but they're still able to do something like that. And then that's just really positive for the person who's using it.
Wow.
Yeah, I
All
know
right,
we're also using in a psychological sense, so in PTSD. So if veterans are coming back after a deployment and they have PTSD, they're able to recreate sort of a similar scenario, war scenario, without the risk, obviously, and help them to overcome those traumatic memories. So it's being used in a lot of fantastic ways, which is really great.
Wow, cool. So we've spoken about unconscious memories. What are the other kinds of memories?
Perhaps Vanessa, you might want
to. So the unconscious memories were mainly what we call implicit memories. So those were the procedures. We've also got ones that are called explicit memories. So they're more things that have happened to you. So you will remember like a birthday or your first day of school, for instance, or general fact information. So things about the world. So these memories are stored in the hippocampus, so that's in the temporal lobe, and the neocortex, which is part of the cerebral cortex. And then close to the hippocampus, we also have the amygdala in the temporal lobe as well. So those are involved in like the explicit memories. And then we've also got short-term memories, which are mainly in the prefrontal cortex, so at the very front of your brain as well.
Okay, so explicit memories. Give me an example of an explicit memory.
So that was the one let's say you went on this fantastic holiday and you did some sort of experience, maybe bungee jumping or something, and you just remember that really well.
No, I won't be doing that. Thank you.
I don't think that I would be able to either.
Yeah. Okay, so something that you remember really well. And what helps you remember it really well? Is it the physical part of that experience as well? So a bungee jumping thing is, I would imagine, a massive physical response. Is that somehow tied into memory? How you actually, what is it? How you embody that experience as well?
Yeah, all the senses are sort of encoded in that. Particularly, emotion is a really big key in memory.
Right.
So we often remember things that are quite emotional. I imagine bungee jumping would be quite terrifying.
Yeah.
So that is definitely encoded. So there is that part of the brain called the amygdala, which is involved in fear and in processing that emotion. And that's linked in with memories as well. So that's why we often remember things that are scary or evoke that fear response in ourselves.
Okay, cool. That's an explicit memory. So now a short-term memory, I know what a short-term memory is. Most people will know what that is. That's a memory of something that happened very short-term. But what I notice is a lot of people struggle with short-term memory even before they've had a brain injury. And the classic example is, where did I just put my car keys?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So where is the difference? Where is short-term memory stored? And is it in the same places as the other memories, or is it somewhere else?
So short-term memory, it's not like a storage as you would think. Short-term memory is very short. So short-term memory is just like in the next 5 seconds, sort of keeping that. It's like RAM in a computer, just keeping that, whatever's happening at that time in your mind, keeping it in there for enough time that you can either forget about it or that it gets sent to longer-term memory. So it's really short time frame. So when we talk about long-term memory, that's sort of in 20 to 30 minutes. That's when we start thinking about that's a long-term memory now. So short-term is very, very short. And like I was saying, it's not really a memory as such. It's just holding information in your mind for a period of time before it either gets encoded or it's forgotten about. So it relies a lot on attention, really.
Right.
So being able to attend to information and to hold it in your mind is quite difficult. And it's more the frontal part of the brain that's involved in that. So being able to hold that information, and it's a really common experience, particularly following any sort of brain injury. A lot of people are impacted by that, and attention can also impact on that as well.
Okay, so it might be a combination of things happening. You might be lacking the ability to pay attention to something or to concentrate on a task, which then impacts that short-term memory.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Okay, so when I'm quote unquote normal, I haven't got a brain injury, and I walk in and have my keys and I throw them in an unusual spot, and I'm doing it kind of automatically just to get them out of my pockets or out of my hands. Is it that not being mindful of that task, I'm putting my keys on the bench, that kind of interferes with that memory?
Yes,
it's exactly.
Yeah, because you're not paying attention to where you've put it. You're not thinking about that you've put them there. So you're not going to make those connections later on as to where you've put them. Whereas if, for instance, you have a particular spot that you put your keys and that's where they go every day, that becomes a learned habit. So you will know next time that's where my keys are.
Yeah, it's definitely an intentional thing, and that's a normal experience for everyone. So people come in and say, "Oh, I've got problems with my memory. I keep misplacing my keys. I, leave the house and forget whether I'm alive." But those are all to do with attending, so attention, because sometimes we've got lots of other things in our mind. We're not paying attention to what we're doing. So that's not a memory problem per se, it's an attentional problem.
Okay, that's really good to know. And I think it's going to be a relief for a lot of people listening, because there is this thing that you hear people say often that, man, my memory is terrible. Like I can never remember where I put my keys, or, I don't know what I ate yesterday. Is that I don't know what I ate yesterday a short-term or long-term memory thing?
That's long-term memory. But that again is also because we do a lot of things in our day. And if we were to concentrate on everything that we did and store that information, it would be overwhelming for our brain. That's way too much information. So our brain, that's why we have an attentional system. So it takes everything into the senses, but then it decides what's important. What do I need to focus on? What's important, and then from that, once you've focused on something, do I need to remember this? Do I need to store this for later? Is this going to be useful? So for most people, remembering what you had, a couple of days ago, not so eventful unless it was an amazing 5-star meal. But yeah, for most people, that's not essential information.
Unless it was a terrible meal and it gave you diarrhea, and you want to know because you're at the hospital and you're telling the doctors, this is what I ate.
It might be helpful to remember it in that case, so you avoid that in future.
Okay. Well, that's a relief. I like that I'm asking these questions, because I've never asked them before, and I've always associated not remembering what happened 2 or 3 days ago, etc., as not necessarily a good thing. And especially when I was recovering, months later, somebody would say to me, I came to visit you, or when I came to visit you, etc. And I wouldn't have remembered that they were actually here. And even though they came from a long way away, interstate, I kind of said, like, I don't remember. And I'm not sure whether or not what was happening. And I kind of felt bad that I didn't remember that they came.
Particularly following injury, just on that. Following injury, there is sort of a period where the brain's still recovering. So it needs time to sort of settle down. There's the chemicals are out of balance. There's a lot of things happening during that time. So it does make it difficult to lay down new memories at that stage. So that I'm not sure how far past the injury this was. But that
it was probably around 5-6 months past the injury. And the second time that I experienced the bleed in the brain, the blood clot was about the size of a golf ball, and it was near the cerebellum. And it was kind of just sitting there while they were working out how to deal with it. So it took around about, and at that time, what that blood clot did is it impacted my ability to type an email, concentrate, finish a sentence, recall stuff that had just happened to me. It was very difficult for me to keep appointments and remember when they were, even though I had written them down in a diary and had reminders and all that type of thing. So I was feeling quite bad about constantly missing appointments, and I was feeling quite bad about not being able to type an email, drive, all those things. And then when somebody said to me, "I came to visit you," and I said, "Well, I don't remember," it made me feel even worse. So it was around about 4 to 6 months after that second major bleed.
Well, we generally think of recovery as a long-term process. So most recovery will sort of happen in those first 2 years following an injury. But as you know, it can extend further along than that. So I suspect it wasn't anything of your doing, or wasn't any malice, or but just that the brain was still recovering at that stage. And if it's not someone that you see regularly, that also can impact on, whether how your brain's processing the information. Like I was saying before, the importance of the information, and kind of selecting what I need to know for now. And particularly in that recovery process, your brain's doing that even more so. It's got limited resources to put
Can we talk about those limited resources in the context of occupational therapy? Because it's a really big issue when somebody's recovering. The brain's trying to just manage, I imagine, all the regular tasks. It's got parts of it that are offline. It's trying to relearn new tasks. It's been impacted and it has a physical injury, whether it be because of a blood clot and lack of oxygen, or because of a bleed. And now the occupational therapists, amazing as they are making it do even more work. So how do we deal with the energy side of, or the amount of energy that's required to support the brain and then do memories and do all those? Do you know where I'm going with this? I'm going to edit this out a little bit. So where was I going? So I was trying to understand how energy impacts, or the way that the brain uses energy impacts the ability for occupational therapy to be done.
Sorry, I just have to think about that.
That's all right.
Because, one of the major things is that you need to make sure when you're working with someone that you're working within their sort of energy scope. So if you're being overwhelmed with information, you're not going to be able to attend to those things. So I think that the approach that would be needed is to slowly reintegrate some of these things and come up with certain ways of, say, helping you remember what you need to do or what you might have coming up. So perhaps coming up with some more simple ways of doing that, rather than complex instructions and just giving you too much to think about, because you're thinking about recovery physically as well as mentally, and trying to regain your memory.
I remember being in rehab. I spent a month in rehab, and the nasty occupational therapists were getting me to make my own breakfast. And I thought, and maybe they explained why we were doing it, but I don't know now if they did or didn't, and if I was able to remember or not. So this is after surgery. So my stroke experience, my bleeds in the brain lasted around about 3 years. So I had the first bleed in Feb 2014, then in the first bleed in Feb 2012, then in March 2012, and then in November 2014, which then led to surgery. And it was between November 2014 and just before Christmas that I was in rehab.
Yeah.
And I found myself being frustrated and annoyed because I had to make my own breakfast, and my left hand wouldn't work properly.
Yeah.
Why do occupational therapists make us do that?
Well, so my understanding, as I'm still sort of fresh into the OT, but what they would have been trying to do is, so we call it activities of daily living. And so that's where something that a person will do to take care of themselves, or just tasks that they do in their everyday life. So what they would have been using that for is firstly to see how your brain is still working, to make sure that you are able to follow the procedures needed to make your own breakfast, and then using that to assess what they would need to do to try and help you achieve that, to make sure that when you are back home that you're able to do those tasks. Yeah, so it's really important. So there are things they might have, like getting you to brush your own teeth or those sorts of things. It's just making sure that you can do those activities of daily living that are for self-care. Yeah.
Oh, I found it amazing at the time. I was really stunned that I was in hospital being supposedly looked after by all these people, and they were making me make my own breakfast. I couldn't believe it.
One thing to say on that point is it's a really delicate balance, particularly in those early stages, because you the brain at that point is at its most plastic. So it's able to make the most changes at that early stage. So that's probably the theory behind getting in there and trying to get you out of bed to make your own breakfast. So it's good to do as much as you can do as early age. That will optimize the brain's ability to make new connections and to form those skills that you need. Like you said, fatigue is often a huge problem following brain injury.
Yeah.
So it's that balance of finding the right balance between not pushing too much that you're going to push to that level of fatigue where you can't actually learn anything, but also being able to use that really early stage to form those new connections. So there's not an exact science. Sometimes us therapists, we get it wrong. But the intent is really to try and get you as much recovery in that early stage as you can do.
Yeah.
I think small steps are really good. So just doing something for a small amount of time, but frequently. So if you're able to manage, 5 minutes of doing something, then stop, have a rest, do another 5 minutes in an hour's time, stop. So frequent performance is good, but also making sure that you're resting in between, because rest, we know, can help cement those memories for us. So
Yeah.
you need the both.
Yeah, it sure did. Rest was really important. So I was noticing that at the beginning of rehab, the first week of my month in rehab, I maybe was able to do literally a couple of minutes worth of physical effort, and then I was wiped out for the rest of the day. And as that time grew, as my time in rehab continued, I started to notice that 2 minutes became 4 minutes, for example. And then by the time I left, maybe I was able to do 3 sessions a day, and those 3 sessions a day might last half an hour a day, half an hour per session. So it was really good to be able to observe how much I had come, how far I'd come in that short amount of time, in that 1 month. And that really made it, that really gave me a lot of hope for when I get home. If I'm able to continue improving the way that I was improving, that I'll be definitely a further, quite a way ahead by the time 12 months have lapsed. So to go back to those early days of making connections at the very beginning of rehab, when you guys say the brain is most plastic, we're taking advantage of those unconscious memories, those neural pathways that have been interfered with, and single signals aren't getting through perhaps. So are we bringing those to life as well as rerouting and making new ones to take over where the old ones perhaps aren't being, where the old signals are not really good at the moment?
Are you saying whether the damaged neurons can reform connections? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, so I'm asking, so I feel like making a toast or a cup of tea is tapping into those unconscious memories. And if that's what I'm doing and the signal has been interfered with so that I can't make the connections, are we bringing the connections back to life, the ones that have been damaged or put out of action for now? And at the same time, are we rerouting from those ones and making completely new ones?
It can be both. So it depends. It depends on the extent of the injury. If there are some neurons, that die as a result of the injury. They're usually right in the middle of where the injury is. Around that area, there are some neurons that can be saved, or they can also die. So that's what they call the penumbra. It's the area that it surrounds the area of injury. So there's potential there for these neurons to form new connections, and that's what I was saying. In the early stages, it's really important to get that intervention in so that those neurons don't die. They need that stimulation to keep the connection alive. So those neurons in that region, they can form new connections. So it's generally that it's a rerouting, but in a similar area. So there's not too much that happens with once neurons have died. There's not really much that they can do there, but it's using the ones around that can reroute. And if it's in a similar area, if they're similar types of neurons, then they can take over the function of the other neurons that have died next to them.
I'm really comfortable and feel good about the fact that my short-term memory is associated to my awareness of a task at the time, and that if I've dropped my keys and I've been talking to my son at the same time, that his conversation with me is what has potentially made me just forget where I left my keys if it's not in the same spot. That makes me feel a lot better.
Yes.
We've spoken about explicit memories, something that is dramatic, like jumping to your potential doom off of a bungee rope, and having that bodily experience as well as an actual, memory of something exciting and amazing and potentially crazy. I don't know what. And we've spoken about unconscious memories that are the things that the types of memories that are there because it's a task that we've done over and over and over again, and we just know how to do it. When I'm sitting in my car, I'm driving away, and a song comes on that I haven't heard in forever. And it reminds me of, I hope my wife's not listening, that girl that I used to like back then. Well, what kind of memory am I drawing on there? Because there's a lot more going on than just I'm remembering a song, but I'm also remembering a time and how it made me feel and who I was with and what I couldn't say to her. What are we tapping into there? What kind of a memory is that? And why is it so full on and so dramatic and so easy to fire that off?
So memories are particularly associated with strong emotions, and they get encoded really well. So it's kind of like an associative memory. So you have your memory of that event, and the song in this case is like it's a trigger for that memory. It's like a cue to say, oh, that memory, remember that memory when you were looking at that girl you really liked and they had that song playing.
And she ignored me.
Well, we can skip that part. So it's that association. We learn by associating things with each other. So when you had that initial memory of that song with the girl, they got coupled together, associated together. So when you heard part of that association, the song, it also activated the girl because they're being associated with each other. And a lot of our memories are made through associations. So a lot of the classic sort of experiments that they did back in the 60s when ethics wasn't really a thing, and they could, scare babies and rats and do lots of those sorts of funny experiments. Yeah, well, associations. So they got babies to associate. I think it was a white rabbit, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's the famous little Albert experiment.
Right.
And then they ended up just disliking anything that was white and fluffy, pretty much.
Yeah, so they kind of they taught him to associate a white rabbit with a negative. I think they had quite a loud sound. So a lot of our memories are associative. We learn things together, and they get paired together, and then when one of them comes up later on, we remember all the other things that were associated with it.
Wow. That's really good. Can we take advantage of those associated memories in occupational therapy, in rehab, to help that person today?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. They do a lot of the associated memory. So you can use associations to learn new memories. So it can help with, we were talking earlier about remembering names. If you meet someone at a party and they've got a name of someone that you knew in primary school, you can make an association. You can be like, oh, this is John. I had a John in primary school, and find a similarity that they both have. So perhaps they both have spiky hair. You can be like, oh, that's John. He's got the spiky hair like John from primary school, and you make that association in your mind. So you're linking it to something already that's in your mind. That's already a memory that you have from many years ago, and you're meeting a new person, but you're linking them to an old memory. So that's going to make it a lot easier for you to find that new memory and to learn it to begin with, but also to find it when you next meet John at a party and you're like, oh, that's John, because I've linked it to something I already know.
That sounds like a memory trick.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, so these are things that you can use, anyone can use, but particularly following brain injury, it's a good thing to try and associate things with things that you already know, or things that are meaningful to you. So the more that you can link new information to something that you know already, or that has meaning, has that emotional sort of aspect to it, the more you're going to be able to remember that information.
Emotional experiences stored in a different part of the brain. Is that kind of memory stored somewhere else, or is that also stored where we find other regular memories?
So emotion it forms part of the circuit. Emotion is generally more in sort of that frontal. There's like a frontal region where emotions are sort of dealt with, and also the fear like I mentioned before, was the amygdala. But they form a circuit within, so there's like a memory circuit, and so that will go through the memory section, so that primary memory area in the hippocampus. But that also links up with the amygdala. It links up with the frontal cortex. So it makes this little pathway. So as you go along, you have the memory, but then the emotions also activated. Whether there was a specific motor component, like with the bungee jumping, that might also be activated in the memory. So whatever was occurring at the time of the memory, that will be encoded in it like a pathway. And when you recall the memory, that pathway is lit up again. So you remember all aspects of the memory.
Okay, so if that pathway is lit up backwards, it doesn't matter. So if, for example, I can't remember who I was at the bungee jumping with, but I bungee jumped, and then I kind of take a backwards path to who I was with. Is that one way to kind of activate a or a more detailed part of a memory that perhaps has been missed or lost?
It can be. So memories are not exact recordings of what happens to us. So that's one thing to note. So you might not have recorded that to begin with, who you were with. maybe it wasn't put in that memory trace. And as you recall information, each time that you recall it, it's not the same pathway exactly. It can get a little bit different. So we don't recall events exactly as they happened, and we don't recall them exactly as they were initially encoded. Each time that you recall it, it can change a little bit. So that's why when you have expert witnesses in courts, it can often be a bit hairy because they might be remembering something differently to how it actually happened when they saw the crime. Or
Yeah. So is it true then, what you're saying, is it true that what we remember is a memory of the memory?
yes, exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah, exactly what
Wow.
I'm saying. But that's for everyone. That's
Yeah.
not brain injury specific. That is everyone.
That's deep.
So that's our own personal experience. And because we interpret things, we're not recording. It's not like a video camera recording everything. We interpret, we decide what, like I was saying, what's important. What does that mean? How am I going to record that? We add on things sometimes. The emotion can often change our experience of the event. So we are active participants in when we're forming memories and when we're recalling them. Yeah.
So sometimes we might even make the memory suit our particular needs. For example,
absolutely. Yes.
like in an argument with our lovely partner, we might say, but I don't remember that. I remember it like this.
Yes. Exactly. And both are true. You've got your own versions of the event. So it's a good one for next time you're having a disagreement.
I'm learning.
Correct.
I'm learning. In occupational therapy, in that time where we're utilizing the physical tasks to trigger memories and to help the physical, what are we doing? Does doing the physical task trigger the memory, or can a discussion trigger the physical task? So can we go backwards? So what I'm saying is, do you remember when you used to pick up a ball, Bill? Yeah, I do. Okay, how did you do that? I did it like this. Or is it better to say, okay, Bill, here's a ball, and then just leave it at that and tell them, put the ball over there and let them pick it up and move their hand and do it? Are they two different paths to the same thing? Is one better than the other? Should we be doing one before the other?
I think that it could probably go both ways, because with the first example that you gave, that was like when you were saying that you were imagining yourself moving in a particular way. So what you would be doing if they said, do you remember how to do that? You'd be reactivating those pathways and sort of visualizing yourself doing that. And then you might be able to go over and you would follow those procedures that you've just mentioned to go and pick up that ball. But I guess you could also be told, okay, just go and pick that up. But you would probably go internally through those processes as well. Even if you weren't prompted, then you might still internally be going, okay, so how am I going to go and pick up this ball? And you just think about that yourself.
Right. So either way, what we're doing is we're somehow replaying the tape of, in the past, when I've done this, this is how it's gone, or this is how the process has unfolded to the end result. And whether you're triggering that by actually using words, or I'm triggering that by just trying to understand what you're asking, we're basically doing the same thing. We're trying to apply what we've done before to the current situation.
Yeah.
I think on that point also depends what has occurred in the injury, whether or not there's been some sort of physical injury to the hand. So not so much maybe in stroke patients, but say perhaps following a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, that there might also be actual physical aspects of so the muscles themselves might be impacted at the local level. So in that case, sort of just playing over the motor memory in your mind is not going to help too much. You need to get the movement back. So say in the hand, like actually physically moving the hand so that you're getting that muscle strength back. So there's the brain, but there's also the muscles that are controlling that movement at the local level. So looking at both aspects.
Yeah, so if somebody's experiencing spasticity, they may actually know what to do, they may know how to do it, but they may not physically have the ability yet to stretch the fingers out and then or grasp or close the fingers, clench the fingers, and then squeeze on the ball to move it aside.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so giving them that opportunity to develop that, the motor, the muscle movement. So giving it, getting that activation occurring at the muscle level.
Yeah. I remember when I was in rehab, I was sitting across one of my fellow patients, and he had hemiplegia, and I think it was his left side that was impacted as well. I can't remember. Maybe it was his right side. And the way that he was talking to himself was a real, for me, as somebody who has coach training, I'm amongst other things, I coach people in their life to achieve things that they thought were not possible or they were struggling with. So I'm in rehab and I've got my hand in a bucket of rice, and I have to find the pen lid and the ball bearing and all these different things, and I'm doing this and I'm searching around and trying to find these things, and I'm hearing a guy, and I've done a presentation on this. I'm hearing a guy, I think his name was Ivan, that's the name I've given him. His task was to get a toilet roll and move it from one side of his body to the other side of the body by closing his hand around it and then just picking it up and moving it over. It was an empty toilet roll. There was no paper on the outside. It's just a roll. And when he was looking at his hand, he was saying, "Come on, you bastard, move." And it wouldn't move the way that he wanted to. And he was looking at it and saying, in it really angrily, he was saying, "Move, move." And he wasn't being rude or anything, but he was just talking perhaps as he would to a wooden post on his farm that he was trying to dislodge or something,
Yeah.
And I said to him, the coach came out in me, and I said to him, "Ivan, if that hand did what you wanted it to do and moved the way that you wanted it to and grabbed the toilet roll and put it down in place, what would it be?" And he said, "It'd be my friend." I said, "All right, sweet. So do me a favor. Why don't you call it your friend now and just see what happens?" So as he was going through that motion, he was looking at me, but he didn't really care what I was saying. He was happy to indulge me. He goes, "Okay, friend, move." And you wouldn't believe it. As soon as he said that, with his limited motion, he moved his fingers, grasped the toilet roll, moved it over and put it on the side that it was supposed to be without it falling over. It literally took, I'm not sure whether it was like even a second for him to just go from the previous experience to the new experience and get that thing achieved. And then he was extremely excited and really just everyone was going, "Wow, woo, woo." Everyone was freaking out around the table. There was probably about 10 people around there, including occupational therapists and other patients. What was different? Obviously the words were, but what can you explain about what was different between when he's calling his hand a bastard and then when he's calling his hand a friend to make that dramatic improvement in his motion and in his range of movement?
So from a psychological point of view, we know that the way we think about things can impact on our behavior. So often if we're thinking that negative things are going to happen, it's an unconscious thing, but we can sort of bring about the negative things through our thinking of the negative things. So in our mind, perhaps he's already saying in his mind that he can't do it. He's playing it over in his head and he's like, "No, I can't do that. Like my hands, like can't move it. I'm not going to be able to do that." And then when he goes to and attempts to do it, he can't do it. So just changing that belief sometimes can help, visualize. If he visualizes that he can do it, that might just help in that, just activating that pathway a little bit better. rather than anticipating or even imagining that he wouldn't be able to do that. So sometimes the mindset, it's quite crazy in that way that it can really impact on how we behave and what we're able to achieve. Sometimes if we just have that little belief and we have that a bit of imagination to picture it, then we can bring about some more change. That's not to say that, you know, if you're in a wheelchair and you just picture yourself walking, that's going to happen. But just having that little bit of belief that you can, or that you might be able to do something a little bit more than you're able to do now, can often help.
Yeah, I was just curious. I wanted to know, like I want to know all these things from you. I wanted to know from him what would happen. And I couldn't believe myself what I saw, because I'd never coached somebody, you know, back in 2014 in that space where they were healing from physical challenges related to an injury, especially from stroke. So when I said that to him and he just did it, we got that result and I was just stunned. And I realized that what also was happening was that the way that when he was, because I then tried it on myself, I used those words to describe my arm. And when I did that, what I noticed is that I became more tense. The muscles contracted differently and released differently. And so did my fingers. And then when I was nice to myself, everything changes. My whole physiology changes. And therefore my muscles moved differently. And therefore my arm opened and contracted differently. So I got a really amazing learning. I learned so much from that experience. That's such a small experience. And that's kind of been what's motivated me with my recovery. And he definitely wasn't walking. So I didn't say to him, "Oh, Ivan, call yourself a friend and then get up off your wheelchair." You know, that didn't happen. But I would like to think that that lesson taught him to later on, when he was able to regain the use of his arm and start walking again, that he hopefully applied the same thing to his leg and then maybe got some results that he didn't. That maybe at the beginning he was unsure whether he'd be able to get again because of what he had been through. So I found that fascinating. Now, as we come to wrap up, I want to touch on the topic of alcohol. So in the first couple of years after brain injury, the National Stroke Foundation in Australia says that you should avoid alcohol. And I read that at some point. And I think the recommendation is for at least a couple of years. And I did for 5 years. I avoided alcohol for 5 years because every time I drank something, it made me feel like I was having a stroke again. And even today, if I drink more than about half a standard drink, I still feel like I'm having another stroke. So it's not a nice feeling. So when people are recovering, I suppose the question is, when we talk about, I've had way too much to drink, I think I'm killing some brain cells, or I've killed some brain cells last night, or I don't remember what I did last night. Are we interfering with our memory in that we are removing memory pathways, or what is happening when we drink alcohol to our memory and we can't remember what we did last night?
So it's a bit of a fallacy that alcohol kills brain cells. So they've done a lot of research in the past few years looking at, they used to think that alcohol caused dementia. And they did a lot of research looking at this, and they found that it's not actually the alcohol that leads to what they call Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, which is the dementia that they associated with alcohol. That it's not actually the alcohol itself that was causing the damage, but rather a thiamine deficiency. And thiamine is B1, vitamin B1. So alcohol has, it impacts on our gut. So it stops us from being able to absorb things properly, one of which is B1, vitamin B1.
Wow.
That has really important impacts for the brain. It's very important B1 is really important for the brain. So that's kind of what they found in the research, is that it's not the alcohol itself, it's an indirect effect through depleting the B1 in our brains that causes the neurons to be damaged. So it's not alcohol per se. Alcohol does have other impacts, obviously, in the gut, in absorption of different vitamins that we need. So when you go out and have a big night and you drink way too much, and the next morning you're not able to remember it, it's not that memories are lost. They weren't there to begin with. So it's very hard to lay down new memories because you're not paying attention. You're often doing quite silly things. Your reasoning's not there. Your brain's not functioning the best when you're taking alcohol. So it's not that you're forgetting memories. It's just you're not putting them down to begin with. They're not getting stored to begin with. So it's not impacting the memory in that it's taking away a memory that was already there, or that it's killing off neurons that were storing a memory.
Wow. That's fascinating to know that actually alcohol impacts the gut directly, and therefore that issue that it's doing in the thing that it's causing in the gut is directly impacting the brain.
Yeah, so it works through that way, but also works particularly if you're drinking a lot of alcohol. You tend to eat a lot less because there's a lot of calories in alcohol. You get a lot of your nutrients from the alcohol, not nutrients really, but you get
energy.
Energy to sustain yourself. So most people who are drinking a lot of alcohol will not be eating particularly well, and you can see thiamine deficiency in other areas as well. So people who have diabetes, sometimes if they're not managing their diet well, you can find thiamine deficiency in that sense as well. So it's kind of the two prongs. So it's in the gut, the alcohol is not helping with the absorption, and also that they're drinking so much alcohol that they're not eating a proper diet, so they're not getting their B1 through a normal diet.
So this is me just thinking out loud, but you just triggered something. So I've read a lot of books that suggest that Alzheimer's or dementia, I think it's Alzheimer's, is type 3 diabetes, or is starting to be spoken about as type 3 diabetes. So it's interesting that you said that people who are experiencing diabetes, who have diabetes, I imagine it's type 2 diabetes, will therefore have a thiamine deficiency.
It's not necessarily. It can be seen. It's depending on how they manage their diet. So if they're managing their diet really well, then they're fine.
Right.
But if they're not managing it so well, they can have that B1 deficiency.
Right. And then as a result of that, they are at greater risk of developing a neurological condition like dementia.
Yes, if it's very prolonged, if it's been sort of months to years that they've been having a poor diet, then it can lead to cell death in the brain. But it's one of those things where if you start replenishing the B1 quite soon after recognizing that there's a deficiency, then you can gain some of that back. So it's not a dementia in the traditional sense where usually in dementia it's a progressive loss of neurons, and there's no
way back.
Yeah, exactly. There's no way of recovering that function. So it's they used to call it a dementia, but it's not really referred to as dementia anymore in the literature.
Okay, interesting. So we might be going down another rabbit hole, and we are definitely coming to the end of the episode. So if this is a rabbit hole for another episode, then that's fine. But can I quickly just touch on the fact, or studies suggest, and I've read some literature about the possibility that people who experience a brain injury are at greater risk of dementia later on in their later life. Is that something that you guys have heard about?
I've heard of that in relation to concussion. So mainly from the sense that if you have multiple concussions, so for instance, people who are playing high impact sports, that there are repeated tears in the brain, and then that can impact memory later on. At this stage, I'm not entirely sure of why that, is the relationship, but I have heard that.
They're doing a lot of research in this area because it's a hot topic at the moment. It's out there in the media. It's particularly in the sports field. The research to date is saying that as long as, in particular in concussion, as long as the concussion is well managed, so that you're not letting a child who's just knocked his head and had a concussion go out on the field 5 minutes later, that you're taking him to hospital, that you're giving him rest, that you're allowing appropriate amount of time for him to recover. So as long as those events are managed well, there's not so much evidence at the moment, at least, that multiple, sort of like 2 or 3, perhaps if you had, sort of 10 or more, there might be more in that respect. But the evidence at the moment is mainly suggesting that as long as they're well managed following a concussion, that the risk of getting a dementia later on is not too great as opposed to the general population.
That's perfect. On that note, I want to thank you both for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I hope I can make you guys the people that I can just call on whenever I want to ask something that's related to psychology, the brain, neuropsychology, occupational therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've given us some great thoughts as well, things that we're going to go off and look into. But,
yes.
But yeah, absolutely. You've got
yeah, thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Discover how to support your recovery after stroke. Go to recoveryafterstroke.com.